AI handles the compute, but it actually scales on optics. Coherent just proved that by blowing past $2 billion in quarterly revenue and picking up a massive $2 billion check from NVIDIA to boot. Welcome to Earnings Unscripted. Today's August 12th, 2026, and we're unpacking Coherent's Q4 print, the ticker COHR. Miro, the demand here is just relentless.
It's actually staggering when you step back. They're basically operating as the central nervous system for the whole AI hardware build-out. Revenue jumped roughly 34% year over year, and non-GAAP EPS beat expectations easily at $1.74. They're absorbing an insane amount of capital.
Right, and the tape was just absolute whiplash today. The stock gapped up hard going into the regular session and then completely tanked right after hours before the call started. But once management got on the mic, it just ripped back up to finish green about 5% against yesterday's close. Which, since we're talking wild price swings, keep in mind we just dissect these calls for our own curiosity. So please don't treat any of this as professional investment advice.
Fair enough. And honestly, the volatility makes total sense because the market was panicking over, Substack rumors, basically, claiming some of their next-generation optics orders were getting delayed. And then the CEO gets on the call and says, no, they're actually seeing customers pull orders forward. Panic over.
Exactly. So basically, the data center segment's completely taking over the company at this point.
Yeah, data centers now the vast majority of their total revenue. The legacy industrial side of the business actually shrank sequentially. Part of that's just because they're spinning off units like their aerospace division, but it highlights how incredibly lopsided the growth engines become.
But here's the thing that doesn't make sense to me. They're ramping up manufacturing at light speed, and their capital expenditures just doubled quarter over quarter. Usually in hardware, scaling that fast completely wrecks your gross margins. Yet they keep expanding profitability quarter after quarter. I need to know how they're pulling that off physically on the factory floor.
It basically comes down to tangible geometry on the factory floor. They're transitioning their core manufacturing from legacy 3-inch to new 6-inch indium phosphide wafers.
Okay, wait, 6-inch what? They just made the literal underlying discs bigger and that magically saves money?
Well, it's the exact same semiconductor material, just a much larger canvas. And normally that isn't simple at all. When you scale up a wafer's physical size, you typically lose a massive percentage of chips to defects early on. But their engineering team actually cracked the yield issue right out of the gate. CFO Sherry Luther explained the math on the call. We get 4 times the amount of output from that wafer versus 3-inch, but it's at half the cost.
Oh, wow. So they're getting a 4x volume bump while literally having the expense per unit? That's a ridiculous margin cheat code. It's not just aggressive pricing. They're fundamentally altering their own unit economics.
Exactly, and that physical advantage is what's letting them completely dominate their margins. Management pointed out they've improved gross margin in 8 of their past 9 quarters, which accumulates to an expansion of over 660 basis points. You rarely see that kind of structural consecutive gain in a heavy hardware business.
Okay, so when you combine a margin cheat code with insatiable AI demand, the massive check from NVIDIA starts making total sense. But where's all that fresh capital actually going? You can't just buy infinite wafers.
Right, they're funneling a ton of it into their Sherman, Texas plant to build out ultra-high power continuous wave lasers. And having a huge domestic hub right now is the ultimate hedge against any geopolitical or tariff risks. Plus, the government is essentially rewarding them for it. They just secured a CHIPS Act letter of intent for up to $50 million to help finance that modernization.
Okay, hang on. Continuous wave lasers. We were just talking about transceivers. Are these new components part of the exact same system, or are we looking at a completely different architecture here?
Different architecture. And this is where the real technological moat kicks in. The industry's moving towards something called co-packaged optics, or CPO. The idea is instead of plugging an optical module into the edge of a switch, you integrate the optics physically on the same package as the silicon itself, which drastically drops power consumption.
Right, and that was exactly the target of those bearish rumors we mentioned earlier, wasn't it? Analysts were saying the market wasn't ready and those CPO orders were getting pushed out.
Yeah, completely backwards. CEO Jim Anderson shot that down hard. His exact quote was, "We have seen absolutely no push out of CPO demand. In fact, it has been the opposite. We have seen demand increase and request from customers' demand getting pulled in."
It's amazing how wrong the whisper numbers can get. But wait, if everything gets integrated directly onto the chip package, doesn't that threaten Coherent? Because right now they're selling the separate pieces, right?
They used to just sell the pieces. That's why they're launching a new platform next month called Photon Link. It effectively shifts them from being an ingredients vendor to delivering the entire integrated optical signal chain. Anderson laid down a pretty big flex saying, "We think we have the broadest, deepest photonic technology in the industry and the most extensive manufacturing footprint. They don't just want to sell parts, they're trying to act as a true one-stop shop."
Which makes perfect strategic sense, but building out fully integrated platforms and spinning up massive Texas factories doesn't come cheap. That takes some painful upfront cash.
Yeah, it really does. And that's the lingering issue hiding in this report. Their capital expenditures practically doubled quarter over quarter, jumping from roughly $290 million up to $556 million. So the underlying tension here is how long they have to sustain that red line burn rate just to meet this incoming capacity ramp, and what happens if it starts squeezing their free cash flow completely dry.
That's the real tension right there. When you're building out the highway while the traffic's already speeding on it, your free cash flow naturally takes a hit. But considering they've got that massive NVIDIA investment acting as a backstop, maybe management feels they can safely run the engine at the red line for a while.
True, that equity injection provides a very comfortable safety net, and they clearly believe the top-line expansion will just outpace those upfront capital costs. For the upcoming first quarter, they're guiding revenue to a midpoint around $2.3 billion. The CEO even explicitly projected crossing a $3 billion quarterly run rate by the end of next fiscal year.
Scaling up to that kind of run rate so quickly is a wild level of ambition. But it does bring up a pretty glaring question about balance. With data center sales now consuming almost 80% of the entire pie, they're incredibly top-heavy. If AI infrastructure spending cools off even a tiny bit, this whole structural growth narrative is completely exposed.
Exactly. They've effectively traded diversification for hypergrowth. And when you consolidate your bets like that, the external variables become incredibly magnified. Plus, they still have an unresolved regulatory inquiry hanging out there regarding past component shipments to Huawei, so any fresh geopolitical friction could really complicate this domestic manufacturing hedge they're trying to build.
Right. So basically, they're strapped to a rocket, and we're just waiting to see if their physical heat shields hold up against the burn rate. It's an absolutely fascinating structural pivot to watch. We'll definitely be keeping an eye on how that new integrated optics platform actually performs in the market when it goes live next month.
Always a pleasure. See you next time.
If this breakdown made your commute a bit more interesting, feel free to keep us in your feed for the rest of earnings season. Just keep in mind that this entire podcast, our voices included, is a fully synthetic AI experiment designed to parse dense semiconductor transcripts and turn them into an actual conversation on the exact same day. We'd love to know how it's working for you, or which company you want to hear next. So drop us a note at earningsunscripted@datamadness.ca.
Thanks for listening. See you soon.